Hurley, can you tell us a little bit about your family background, where you grew up?
Well, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. My parents had a home right in the city, and then my grandmother had a big farm outside the city in Wheaton, Illinois. So as a youth growing up, I had a lot of opportunity to explore driving all sorts of vehicles, from tractors to go-karts to full-size. I was driving a full-size car when I was 12 years old, and we had set up a little course out in one of the fields, so I was learning about drift and all that kind of stuff at a pretty early age. So I went off to boarding school at a fairly early age. Went away in the 7th and 8th grade up to Boston, Massachusetts, and then I went to prep school up in Vermont, and then I came down to college in Florida, and that's when I met Peter Gregg and the whole racing thing got started.
Now, was that just a casual meeting, or at...
Well, when I had graduated from college, or high school, I got a motorcycle, and then my mother started reading all these reports about how dangerous motorcycles was, so I was able to wrangle the motorcycle into a Corvette, and I took the Corvette with me when I went to college, and I used to race the Corvette in autocrosses all across the state of Florida, and I was pretty much unbeatable. And one weekend we had an event in Jacksonville, and Peter Gregg was there with his race car. It came on a big fancy transport, and everybody was moaning and groaning, and I didn't know who Peter Gregg was at that point. And I beat him, and he came over and introduced himself, and he said, "You got to be pretty good to beat me," and that's how we became friendly. And he knew that I was kind of interested in racing, and I went with him with his crew and helped on the crew to the races. And then I basically, when I got to be 21, I had talked my dad into helping support my racing, and he basically agreed to do that, but he put a time limit on it. He said, I will help finance this program for you for 2 years, and after 2 years is over, you have to be going successful enough to continue at the same level without using any of your funds. So basically I thought, well, I'm going to get 2 years of having a good time, and then I'll go do something more reasonable, and the rest is history.
Were you an SCCA member at that time, or just?
No, I was not an SCCA member. I remember I had a regional license, but Peter had decided that in 1969, I turned 20 in 1969, 21 in 1969, and that we would run the 6 hours of Watkins Glen. And I said, "That's great, but I don't have any license." He said, "Well, don't worry about the license. You'll get it through NASCAR." So back then it was simply you mailed your money in and you got a NASCAR license. Then once I had the NASCAR license, I applied to the FIA and got an FIA license. And then as long as I had my FIA license, I could race here. So I arrived in Watkins Glen. Really, this was one of my first races, and the SCCA people here were just having a fit. And Peter said, "Don't worry about it. He's fine, and I'll take full responsibility for him." And we won the race, and I've been winning races at the Glen ever since. Then I went off into the military. I went to Vietnam at the end of 1969. I was over there for a little over a year. Came back in 71, and then in 71, Peter and I decided that we would run for the entire IMSA championship. That was the first year of IMSA. And we had a 914-6, which I actually owned. And the deal was I owned the car, and then Peter would do all of the preparation and end of the races, and I would co-drive with him. He paid me to drive with him. And we won. That was the giant killer. We were racing in the 2.5 liter class. So it was under, that was under, and then there was over, which was the big Corvettes. And we were so good that we were beating the Corvettes on a pretty regular basis, and I won the, Peter and I co-won the IMSA championship in '71. And then in '72, then we went over, we switched to 911. Peter was racing in the Can-Am back then in '72, so he basically gave me the responsibility of running the shorter races to try to win the championship. So I won the championship outright in '72, driving a 911.
At that period of time, Super V was coming along.
Yep.
Was that anything you were interested in?
Well, I was really not targeting the Super V stuff, but Fred Opert asked me if I would drive one of his cars out in California, and I said, sure, I'd love the opportunity. I don't really remember the years, I think, but it was mid '70s, I think, and I promptly went out and won a couple races, but there wasn't a budget to continue on, so I really didn't explore that much more than just a couple races. But the couple races I did run, I either won them or was in the top three.
Can you tell us a little bit about your jump into Can-Am? That's a big jump from a 911.
Well, Peter, of course, had the Can-Am car in 1972, and he had a couple wrecks, and he didn't really enjoy it. So he came to me, and he said, "Would you like to run the Can-Am series?" He said, "I think I think you have the ability to run it." In hindsight, I really had very little years of racing to qualify me to race in 917. I think it was just a crafty way of him to get somebody to sell us this car to. So he again had the first agreement. First three race cars that Brumos had were my cars. So the 914 I owned, the 911 that we raced in '72 I owned, and this 917 that I raced in '73 I owned. So those are the only three race cars that I've owned, and Brumos has all those cars back in our collection. To get back to your point, I accepted that role and was really excited about it, and went into it just as a total greenhorn as far as that kind of performance in that kind of a car. This was a car that had huge horsepower. You know, the 911s had probably at that point under 300 horsepower. I was jumping into a car that had 1,100 horsepower. So there was a little bit of a transition period that was a pretty steep learning curve. But all the guys there, you know, really helped me a lot in adapting to those cars. I remember Mark Donahue kind of really took me under his wing, and Mark probably was the most influential person that had the most direct effect on how I was able to adapt to those cars. So he and the Penske crew were very helpful in our setup and the philosophy and the sort of how you drive these cars and what to do. And it was a lot of fun. I was third in the championship. I got, you know, beaten by Mark, George Fulmer, and then me. So that was pretty good when you had guys like Jody Scheckter and, you know, David Hobbs and all the rest of the guys that were racing against you. To you know, have your rookie year come out third was not so bad. So I think that exposure also gave a bit of a foundation to how I was able to adapt to different race cars that Porsche was watching at that point, because I think that they liked the idea of having an American that they could you know, switch back and forth in different programs that they were running, and somebody that they could feel comfortable with and trust.
Just to go back to the Can-Am car, they were they even had an adjustable wheelbase on them. Do I remember that?
Well, no, they did not have an adjustable wheel. But the 917-10, which is what I had, was a short wheelbase car. When the 30, and Donahue ran that car in '72. Then in '73, Porsche made the 917-30, which was
Right.
exclusive to Penske, and that car put everybody else on the trailer because that was a long wheelbase car, had a different aero package on it, and
They were tubular construction.
tubes. When I look at my car now, I mean, you know, I was just a stupid young kid to drive that car as fast as we were doing it, because if you ever had a frontal impact with one of those cars, it was going to hurt. There wasn't a lot of substance up there. You sat between two 50-gallon tanks of gasoline. I mean, it was a pretty hairy ride, as I remember it. And as I said, I've still got that car, and we race it occasionally, and I am very respectful for that car. You know, it's just it's a wonderful piece of machinery, but it's also pretty frightening if you let it get away from you.
You explained or mentioned that Peter shifted to BMW for one or two seasons. What was it a political thing? Or?
Yeah, it was totally political. Peter was used to getting what he wanted. Porsche wouldn't give him what he wanted, and he said, well, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to go race for BMW. And he did. During the time that he was racing for BMW, I was racing for Waszek Polak in the Trans Am with a 934, and Peter was, he was winning races with the BMW, and then that's when the factory came over with Hans Stuck and Ronnie Peterson, and a bunch of Sam Posey was driving for him. So they were fairly serious, and they had their headquarters here in Hugheytown, Alabama, is where the factory was or the factory team was based, and they ran a really stout program. And then in '78, Peter went back to Porsche because Porsche then realized how big of a threat the BMW was to their dominance, and they wanted Peter back. So that was just one short year. Peter was passed away in 1981, and then in 1983 I had a very serious accident. I had won Le Mans in '83. I came back, I was up in Motorsport and had a bad accident, broke my leg, and it was a serious break, and basically the bottom line was that I did not have the strength to push the clutch down on a Porsche. Back then, that was just on the cusp of when the 962s were coming into play. I had won Le Mans in a 956, which is a predecessor of the 962, and then that car was not allowed to race in IMSA until the wheelbase was extended, so the wheels would be behind the front center line of the wheels. And so basically I was out of luck, and I just said, well, I'm going to basically have to sit out until my leg gets back together again, and which was 2 years. And I got a call from Tullius, and he said, in our cars you don't have to push the clutch down. He said, I'd like to have you come drive for our team. And that relationship lasted 5 years. I drove with the Jags for 2 years or 3 years, and then I drove for him with the Audi program. And he was a great guy. A lot of people didn't like Bob, but I liked him. He and I never had a crossword. I was always kind of a little rebellious because it was, you had to do the uniform thing on that team. You had to be dressed in a uniform every time, and Bob was very explicit about, white shoes, white socks, white shorts, blue or green belt, gold, Army type style belt buckle, white shirt, the whole 9 yards. And I would always have one thing that was not quite up to team standard, different colored belt, or a slightly different shade of sock, or something like that. And he would always, he never said anything. I knew he saw it, but he never said anything. So it was a nice relationship with him, and I really liked the team, and I liked the discipline, and Bob was one of the first guys that really brought the professionalism up to a standard that's now enjoyed by everybody. You walk down pit lane in the Grand Am ranks or IMSA or whatever it is, and the team and the philosophy that you have with these teams, the uniforms, the detail, the preparation, always started by Bob. And to some extent, Peter and Al Hobart were part of that, but
Mm-hmm.
Bob Tullius really brought that disciplined look to sports car racing.
And the preparation there was always excellent. I mean, I know one of his mechanics used to work on Air Force One, and so that's got to be second to none. Talk a little bit about some of the prototype cars and their differences, I guess. The things that stood out about them are...
Well, the prototype, you're talking about GTP?
Yeah.
Sorry. The GTP cars, basically, I drove the Jaguars.
Now that had the Hewlin, is that what made the shifting?
Yeah, it had a Hewlin gearbox.
Just rev it up and
shift. Basically same principles as our Daytona prototypes. It's a non-synchro-meshed gearbox. So you had that car. You had the 962, which was a fantastic car. You had the Ford Probe, which I drove on a couple occasions. The Nissan, which I drove on a couple occasions, which was like a nightmare. This was before I went on to Goodyear tires. But of those cars, the 962 was the Cadillac of that genre of cars. It was very easy to drive it. That's why so many people were able to drive it. It was a very customer-friendly car up to a point. And once it got to that point, then the real pros were able to shine and bring it to the next level. So you had most of the guys that had those cars that ran private teams. There was an owner, like a Bruce Levin or a Bob Aiken or something like that, Rob Dyson, who drove the car, was relatively competitive, and then they would hand it over to their pro driver, and the pro drivers would race together. So it worked out. It was a really nice way that it all worked out, similar to what the initial concept was with the Grand Am. And with the Daytona prototype, is you get an owner and a pro guy, and everything would go great. But the thing that sort of threw that whole thing in the wastebasket was when Brian Redmond brought Carl Haas, when Carl Haas was thinking about building a car, and Carl said, well, he said, I know how we can win all the races. And Brian said, well, how do we do that? And Carl said, well, I'll hire 2 professional drivers. So that was the end of that. And so what happened at that point was that the guys that really had a lot of money had 2 cars, one a pro car and one amateur car that they could drive. So it all worked itself out, and it was fantastic racing. That was probably an era that will never be duplicated again because of the incredible exposure that Camel Cigarettes gave us with R.J. Reynolds. The individual manufacturers were in it, and each one of those individual manufacturers were spending tremendous amounts of money supporting the teams and the series. And we are trying to build that back up with the Daytona prototypes, and it's I think it's beginning to work for Grand Am, because more and more people are becoming interested in these cars, and they're getting more sponsors involved. And when the sponsors get involved, then it's going to be good for everybody, because everybody's going to get a spin off of what they do. So it's marching its way back, because sports car racing has been so fragmented in the last 10 years, and it's fantastic that the the Grand Am and the France family have got this desire to see sports car racing work in this country, and work not just the short term, but work on the long term with a real intelligent, well thought out business plan where people can say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is the graph line of acceleration that these cars are going to have, and it's not going to change for 5 years or for X number of years. So people are confident in spending the money, knowing that they're not going to have to spend the same kind of money the next year to have a better piece. The rules remain stabilized. So that's an important consideration to have. And another thing that sort of dovetails off that kind of thinking is that when I raced in the 70s and 80s, the racing was a hugely important development scale for Porsche. They used what they learned on the racetrack in their street cars. So when they wanted to try something, they tried it on the race car. If it worked on the race car in a racing situation, then it would work on a street car. Nowadays, that isn't really done anymore because a computer analysis does that much more efficiently than a race car can. So what does racing become now in the eyes of a company? It becomes a tool for marketing. How you market what you're doing in racing to help you sell automobiles. And so that's something that the Grand Am guys are doing well, because it's allowing individual teams to come into it with Lexus motors, Ferrari motors, Porsche motors, Ford motors, Chevrolet motors, Pontiac motors, all these different motor combinations, and not have to spend millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. In Audi's case, Audi's spending just unbelievable amounts of money with these prototypes, and for what? It's kind of, when you look at it, it's kind of stupid. And if you had to defend that position, which is one of the reasons why Porsche's not in it at the moment, is because it simply does not make financial sense to get in it at this level. When you can do something like Grand Am and the Daytona prototypes, which will win the races overall for 10 cents on the dollar.
And there's a limited number of chassis builders for it, so that also adds to the savings.
Yep, and your manufacturers come into it and they sell, one car, and that car is going to be X number of dollars, and the 10th car that they sell is going to be the same amount of money, but they're able to amortize that development cost over a 10 car or 15 car, 20 car program, and same thing with the engines. The engines are basically submitted to Grand Am. Grand Am looks at it. They say, okay, yeah, this is good. No, this is not good. And so everybody is pretty confident that the engine formulas will remain relatively equal, regardless of what motor power plant you're using. We with our team, with Brumos, we use a 3.6 liter Porsche motor. It's the smallest motor in the whole field. We look, we're down on torque, which helps you get from point A to point B quickly. Our horsepower is equal to everybody else's, but it's the torque that hurts us. But that's part of our package, because we're able to weigh a little bit less, and certainly if we need more, there we have to negotiate with it. But the negotiation is not a black and white. There's always room for adjustment.
Hurley, you mentioned the Audi car. Tell us about that four-wheel drive Audi car. I know you had one race here that did you do the whole race yourself?
Yeah, I got it into really. Scott Goodyear was supposed to drive with me, and I was. Scott was new to the team, and I was having a great battle and just didn't want to give it up at the pit stop, so I stayed in. And the Audi was really the first time that I had been with a team that really, with a factory team that was excessive. I mean, it was anything that we wanted, we could have. I mean, if I said, "Hey guys, I want to have wood paneling on the dashboard," I mean, the next race I'd have wood paneling on the dashboard. I mean, it was like a driver's dream, and the cars themselves were absolutely fantastic, and it was just a combination that, I mean, it was just a really nice atmosphere to be able to work in that kind of situation where anything you wanted was possible.
Now, was that Tullius?
That was Tullius.
Ran that program. So, and we mentioned marketing a little while ago. They're still using video from those days to market the Audi all-wheel drive now. So it really stood out in history, I think.
Well, those, we came into those things with this funny-looking sedan, and everybody was laughing at us until our first race, when we just hammered everybody, and it was just, the all-wheel drive is certainly something that has found its way into lots of different types of production cars now, and it just is a benefit that is well worth people taking a look at. And Audi was the one that kind of pioneered that system, and in a race car, it was just phenomenal, and that's why they basically banned it. You don't see four-wheel drive cars anymore.
How about just maybe we mentioned Le Mans quite a bit. Could we recap your Le Mans victories?
Well, Le Mans, I've had a good record at Le Mans. And of course, every time I've been to Le Mans, I've been on a factory team, which helps immensely. And so my finishing record there is good. I've got 3 wins there. Le Mans is, when people always want to compare Le Mans to Daytona, and other than the length of the race, there is no comparison. Daytona is a much more difficult race to win and to drive in. For one thing, you've got 12 hours of darkness at Daytona. You only have maybe 5 hours of darkness at Le Mans because of it gets dark there so late. You have it in Europe. The driving is much more disciplined. The guys that are driving the slow cars know they're driving slow cars and stay the hell out of the way. It's very, very cut and dry. If you're a slow car, you stay on the left. If the fast car, you go on the right. And everybody's looking constantly in their rearview mirrors, because back in the 70s and 80s, the approaching speed to overtaking speed was sometimes 70, 80 miles an hour. So you went, really fast by some of these slow cars. Nowadays, the difference is not so great, but even so, it's still very disciplined, and the course is billiard table smooth, very fast. I mean, average lap time speed is 165 miles an hour around there. So it's you really got to concentrate tremendously, and it's long. I mean, for a new guy going there, it takes a long time to sort of figure out the nuances of the racetrack. But it's the Super Bowl kind of, as far as the tradition. It's got, even though Daytona is the same length, I think it's got deeper roots than Daytona. But I find winning Daytona much more gratifying than winning Le Mans. Number one, it's in my backyard, which makes it, my home track, and I've been really successful down there. So it's like going home every time I go to Daytona, and to be able to win down there on such a regular basis makes it even better. So I like going to Daytona better than I do going to Le Mans, because Le Mans is halfway around the world. And but it's so seeped in history that as a racing driver and as a sports car racing, I think everybody deserves to do at least one Le Mans just to sort of take in that whole atmosphere of the Le Mans experience.
International Race of Champions. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
That was really an experience. I had read about iRock and what a big deal it was to get invited, and when I was invited, I was just blown away. I mean, it was a cool deal. The cars were completely alien to me as far as how they handled the stock car philosophy of drafting and positioning yourself on the racetrack to take advantage of drafting was a complete art that I knew nothing about. And Dale Earnhardt kind of took me under his wing because I think he felt sorry for me. And he said, this is what you need to do. And I listened to him because I knew, Dale was the best. And Dale was in every single iRock that I was in. And he only told me just so much. He wouldn't tell me everything. But he told me enough to keep myself safe and out of trouble and not to screw somebody else up with a move that you might make and not think about what the consequence might be. But it was a thrill, and being able to be, come from a different form of racing, stock or sports car racing, and sort of go into that sort of stock car type of automobile, racing with all kinds of guys that did the Dale Earnhardts, the Mark Martins, the Rusty Wallaces, with Larry Arendijk and all the guys from the IndyCar thing, Michael Andretti. It was a really big thrill, and it was tons of fun. I really enjoyed did it 4 times. My best finish out of those 4 times, I think, was 4th. I could have won the race if I just had not gotten greedy, but I just tried to do that pass and got hung out, and that was the end of that. But it was a thrill and a treat.